What is the relative? In order to realize true nature as absoluteness, we need to understand the principle of the relative world, the phenomenal world into which the absolute truth manifests itself. When we can understand it correctly, we come to realize true nature as the absolute that we cannot cognize. Here arises a question. It would be good if the absolute manifested itself as it is. But why does it appear complicated? As we said before, the absolute cannot be cognized in the phenomenal world due to oneness. And also we cannot cognize it because it existed pre-consciousness. Beyond the cognition system, we have to try to understand the relative, so that when the relative is completely melted down in our hearts, then we will realize the absolute. The absolute that cannot be cognized by dualistic discrimination has to appear as the relative cognizable in order to manifest itself. That is the secret of the phenomenal world. When the absolute manifests itself, it must appear as the relative. In Korean, this is called Saek form, the phenomenal world, and Gong emptiness, the world beyond the phenomenal. Saek is the objective universe that we can see and live in. Let's look at what characteristics the relative, the objective universe has. First, the relative has to be cognized. If it is not cognized, it is not the relative. The concept of Gong is in relative cognition, due to being the reverse of Saek. In order for there to be cognition, there must be at least two things. Because in the state of the absolute, there is no separation into observer and object, and therefore cognition is impossible. There must be separation. However, a being divided into more than two is confusing. After one is divided into two, it has to be divided again, continuously. This perpetual division has eventually led to the phenomenal universe. And that is why the universe has become complicated. Second, the relative has to exist. As the absolute is existence itself, it cannot exist as a manifested individual. But an object must be in a state of being, due to being cognized. To be a being, it must be born. It has to appear to begin. And so it follows that if it appears, then it has to disappear. Beginning must follow ending. These can actually be thought of as a single word. If one of these two is absent, then the other also has to disappear. The concept of beginning exists due to ending, and ending due to beginning. Therefore, all manifestations appear and disappear in pairs. Because the relative beings need objects in order to exist. Theoretically, they are all made of concepts of relativity. Relative beings must disappear after their appearance. Therefore, the manifested beings are illusion, not reality. Because of the ending that follows beginning, true existence cannot disappear. But all beings that we can see are illusional. Because they appear, they must disappear. It is as the objective universe that the absolute manifests itself. Why do all beings in that universe appear as illusions? Why must they disappear? As we have already explored, true nature has to be divided into more than two in order to be cognized. Also, true nature appears as individual beings. Relative existence by the law of dependent origination, that nothing exists independently of other things. there must be such a mediator. If A is to be born as B, A gives birth to B and then will at some point later be dead. Then B also brings C into being and will disappear in turn. Continuing birth-death likewise indicates dependent origination. Beings appearing in succession. In the case of human beings, grandmother gives birth to mother, and then mother gives birth to daughter, on and on through the cycle. Consider a tree, which produces a seed that grows to be another tree. That produces a seed again. The cycle continues. Dependent origination with no self, as discovered by Sakyamuni Buddha, means that no self equals dependent origination and vice versa. Not that no self is separate from dependent origination. Dependent origination has two important rules. First, one is born from another. One cannot exist alone due to dependent origination. Any lives, including humans, cannot be born by themselves. Second, one cannot exist by oneself. If someone existed alone, they could not be cognized. In this relative world, they can be cognized only when existing relatively. So they cannot exist alone. These two rules, that one cannot exist either for oneself or alone, are the basis of dependent origination. Something is born by another and exists with that other. Speaking simply, if there is no you, then I cannot exist. Then how can such a being be called I in subjectivity? What is the subject? Whatever exists by itself and doesn't ever change can be a subject. But if it is born from another, exists with another, and eventually disappears, then it cannot be a subject. Phenomenal beings that keep changing and disappearing cannot be subjects. When we realize the law of dependent origination, we come automatically to realize no self. All sentient beings in the phenomenal universe that continue to live and die by the law of dependent origination have no self that has any independent existence of its own. That is no self. There is no self existing independently, because all are manifested by the law of dependent origination. Sakyamuni Buddha's first saying after enlightenment was, that arises because of this arising and that disappears because of this disappearing. That exists because this exists. And that doesn't exist because of the non-existence of this. The first sentence means that one cannot exist for oneself, and the second means that one cannot exist alone. This is dependent origination with no self, the core idea of Sakyamuni Buddha. No self means no karma, and no karma means no cycle of rebirth. Then who am I? Who is the true me? From the phenomenal perspective, is it no self? And from the view of absolute truth, is it true nature? The pure consciousness manifested from true nature is I as a subject, which is not divided into me or you from the whole. Then, what is I in the phenomenal world? It does not mean I as a subject, but as a word in opposition to you. The relative concept in an objective world. Let's look more deeply at the above. Because we are born as relative beings and live with a relative concept. All sentient beings in a relative world are relative beings that have a relative concept. And those beings with relative concept have a relative cognition system. That is, the human consciousness is made as such. Therefore, all concepts used by humanity exist as relative pairs. There is no exception in the above principle.